Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to WIF Academy. Today we have with us the psychology panel consisting of Inchara Athreya. Inchara is a year 2 psychology with linguistics student. She secured the Department of Psychology prize for securing the highest mark in her year. She's also presented a research project at the International Conference for Undergraduate Research. She also works as a research assistant and student experience coordinator with the Department of Psychology. We're glad to have you, Inchara. Today, we would like to cover some module-specific and course-specific questions with respect to psychology, and then move on to a couple general questions. So, getting right to it, the first question is, as a psychology with linguistic students, how would you suggest straight psychology students make their notes for language in question, a second-year module?
Thank you, Pratyush. So, language and cognition is a module that students who do psychology and linguistics probably have a bit more experience with because we learn some of the content in linguistics. But I think as a straight psychology student, the best way to make notes is to engage with the lecture content to the best way possible, but also go back and try and find some readings that cover those topics more in depth, because a lot of the concepts covered in the module, especially in the beginning, are some core concepts that you need to have a good understanding of to do the rest of the module. So I think the best thing to do is go back and try and strengthen those concepts. And even talking to the psychology and linguistics students may be helpful because in linguistics, it's taught in a fairly different way. So if that helps understanding, that may also come in handy.
Thank you. The next question is, the exam structure for individual differences, a second year module, is a little tricky compared to the other exams in year 2. Could you give some tips on how to prepare and make proper comprehensive notes for that?
Okay, so the individual differences module is split into two parts, as we know, personality and intelligence. So I think with the exam format being a mixture of MCQs and short answers, it's very important to know the nitty-gritty and the details, as opposed to an essay-based exam where you could just focus on the broader content and then narrowing down during the exam. I think it's really important to have clear-cut notes for an exam like this where you have straight to the point and MCQ answers. So I think the best way to make notes is identifying keywords. Like every lecture you do, look for some keywords and possible definitions and pointers linked to those, because the questions would most likely be based on those things, those areas of research. And just make very concise keyword specific notes that you can go back to even during the exam, because all the exams are open book and online.
Thank you. Moving forward, studying for brain and behavior seems a little difficult as some of the exam questions are very abstract and application and knowledge based. So, how would you recommend studying for this module?
Okay, I would say that is one of the harder first year modules because not only is it very abstract, it's very biology based. So it requires, again, in depth understanding, very detailed understanding. But at the same time, the readings that are given for that module are very detailed. The handouts that are given after every lecture go into great detail. So I'd say the best way to revise is probably go over the lectures once or twice extra from when you do them the first time, and just keep making very detailed notes to re-emphasize those concepts. It's obviously really hard because the questions, you'll never find the answers directly in the readings for the most part. So you have to have a proper understanding. And in order to do that, you have to make sure you know the core concept and you're able to apply it. And also, practice makes perfect. So going over the practice questions that are given a few times, or even like trying to recall what the mini tests had in them and working from that, trying to think what areas you can improve on from those is probably the best way to cover the content in that module.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you prepare for the 24-hour essay exam? How do you allocate time to different tasks of research, writing, and editing during the exam?
Okay, I'll start with the preparation aspect. I did this for PS112 last year, which is psychology in context. And I think it really helped me. I went through all the different research papers that were mentioned in the lectures and the presentations, and I saved them onto EndNote, which is the referencing software that a lot of us use. And I think that was really helpful. I saved those citations onto EndNote with a small description of what the paper talks about. It takes a while because there's almost like 100 and something papers mentioned in total. But I would say that consisted of a major chunk of my revision for that module. Because if you have all that saved and you know what each paper talks about, when you are trying to reference something from the literature when you're actually writing the essay in the exam, you know which papers talk about what. Like if you just hit search, then you'll find a list of papers that follow the keywords that you're looking for. So your pre-work is already done. So instead of just reading the content over and over, if you do this and save it, you'll have a good amount of your pre-work done for the exam. Coming to the actual exam, for that specific module, it was 3 essays in a span of 24 hours on like fairly different topics. So the way I worked through it, obviously this is very subjective, but the way I worked through it was to do them one at a time and not take too much of a break. So 24 hours can seem like quite a while, but the best idea is probably to start early as soon as the exam opens. Do one whole essay, then take a break, do the next one, then take a break, and then do the last one. Then maybe take an hour or two as a breather, come back, check everything, and see if anything can be made better. But I'd say finishing off earlier in the day is definitely a good idea, because if you keep staring at the same thing for a very long time, you will hit a point where your brain shuts off. So you probably want to get it done nice and early and then come back to it later. Apart from that, really use your pre-work during the exams. That's what comes in handy with pre-work. If you have it done, make sure you use it to the max instead of doing fresh research then, because chances are the research you've already put in is more useful than anything you can do in that short time limit.
Thank you, Inchara. Since you topped your course in year one, could you, maybe talk a bit more about what your strategy and what your approach to studying was?
Okay, so with my approach to studying, I think it was trying my best to stay consistent through the year, but at the same time, making the most of the time you have before the exam, because for in term 3, there isn't really much to do except revisions and exams. So the maximum utilization of that time, I think, is the best way to go about it with where we are right now. I think that's the best tips I could give with that time period. So probably setting a schedule, making sure you can cover all the different modules that you have to cover, because during break especially, you don't know when exactly your exams are. So just making sure you cover everything in the first few weeks of term 3 as well, making sure you cover everything in a balance and preparing in different ways, like module specific strategies. Like I was saying, for the essay based exam, pre-work is probably more important than going through the content over and over. But for an exam like brain and behavior, like I was saying earlier, your concepts have to be strong. So for those, you just have to read the handouts, go over the lectures, make your own notes, do all of that to make sure the content stays in your head, because even though it's an open book exam, you won't have as much time as an essay exam to keep going back to your notes. So I think my strategy was exactly that, preparing specifically to each module, however that module needs the preparation, and making maximum use of the time by creating a schedule. It's very hard to create like an exact schedule and stick to it, but what I do is daily goals, how much of each module I'd like to finish in a day. And I found that that works quite well. Obviously, this is quite subjective. So I think the best thing to do is try a few different things out and see what works best.
Thank you, Inchara. The next question is, what is the best way to utilize essential readings and cover the most appropriate important points while writing answers?
In psychology, especially, I've noticed that the readings really go hand in hand with the content covered in the lectures. They're more of an extension to the content in the lectures. So I'd say the best way to do the essential readings is make sure you know the content in the lectures first, and then add it as a backbone to that. Go back, look at it, and it will really support the content that you've learned in the lectures. So for exams, again, as I was saying, for the essay-based ones, you can use them as your pre-work. you can read through, and you can have that content saved so you know you can reference back to it when you're writing an essay. And even for the other modules that don't have essay-based exams, I think as your final port of call, once you've got all the lecture content clear, you can use the readings to support that and go more in depth into the information to improve your understanding. So you're not just on the surface, you've actually dug deeper into the concepts and you know it properly.
Thank you so much for that. I think we're done with the course-specific questions for now. Now, moving on to some general questions. The first one, and a very obvious one, would be, how do you suggest managing your time during that exam period to maximize productivity?
As I was saying, I think making a schedule is quite important, but at the same time, I found that a lot of people say it's really hard to stick to an exact like hour by hour schedule. So instead of that, like creating some daily goals or even weekly goals of how much you'd like to study in that particular day or particular week, and making sure you get that done. How I look at it is, if I get that done, then I can do whatever with the rest of my day. Like I don't have to do more than that. I make sure I set my time exactly, also so that you're not cramming in the last few days, because that's never good. You need to make sure you have your work done early. So I think optimizing time is the best way to go about it, but also at the same time making sure you don't stress and you have other things built into that schedule. Even just meeting friends, I think at uni it's very important to remember there are a lot of people around you could just go and chill with. So building that into your schedule will actually help you optimize your time, because then the time you sit to study, you'll come back with a refreshed head.
Thank you. Now moving on to the final question. How do you deal with stress and anxiety during exams?
I think, again, this is very subjective, but for me, I make sure I'm cooking good food because that's what I really enjoy doing. So I make sure I cook something nice, so that kind of keeps me motivated to keep going for the rest of the day. Also, like building in extracurriculars that you're passionate about. For me, I love reading. So I'm usually rereading a book during exam time so that I'm not too lost in a new book, but at the same time, I do have something to read. uh, I think talking to people, very important, because you're stressed during exam time, chances are everyone around you is also stressed because of exams. So just talking it out and, coming to the conclusion that it's not as bad as it seems with a group of people is actually quite a bit more helpful than people let on. So just having those conversations, spending time with the people you enjoy spending time with, and also just doing the extracurricular activities that you love, I'd say is what has worked for me.
Thank you. With that, we come to an end with the session. Thank you, Inchara, for giving us valuable insights, and thank you for your efforts and time as well. It indeed will be helpful to the students. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.